In East Asia, a new rising force appeared. The mighty Japanese Empire, reborn after the Meiji Restoration, was hell-bent on expanding its borders, attacking neighbouring countries. Japan was interested to gain hegemony in Asia, and an opportunity arrived when China was having turmoil in the country and was ravaged by civil wars by the beginning of the 20th century. The Empire of Japan's Kwantung Army invaded Manchuria on September 18, 1931, immediately following the Mukden Incident, a false flag event staged by the Japanese military personnel as a pretext for their attack. Japan was thrown into a civil war, also known as the Boshin War, resulting in the end of the shogunate and the restoration of the imperial rule, with Meiji at its head. He began to reform the political system, restoring practical abilities, and consolidated the political system under the Emperor of Japan. A notable reform was also brought to the Imperial Japanese Army, which could be used for future expansion. From 1894 to 1895, the First Sino-Japanese War broke out and China lost its suzerainty over Korea and ceded Taiwan and Penghu Islands to Japan. The Liaodong Peninsula was initially ceded but forced to return to China due to triple intervention. Following the Russo-Japanese War, the Treaty of Portsmouth was signed, in which Russia ceded the southern half of Sakhalin Island to Japan and recognized Korea as part of Japan and agreed to evacuate Manchuria. In 1910, Japan eventually annexed Korea, and in 1914 joined the First World War, gaining Germany's island north of the equator alongside Tsingtao. In January 1915, the Japanese government sent a secret ultimatum of 21 demands to the Chinese government, in which Japan would gain a strong influence in China. When they were published, the Allies were mad at the Japanese actions. At Versailles, China was mad seeing that the return of the former German concession was refused and didn't want to sign the Treaty of Peace, thus nationalism rose in China. In the 1920s, Japan became interested in gaining Manchuria and its vital resources and adopted a more aggressive strategy of colonial annexation due to the rise of extreme nationalism within the country. A minor dispute known as the One-Portion Incident between Chinese and Korean farmers occurred on July 1, 1931. The issue was highly sensationalized in the Imperial Japanese and Korean press and used for considerable propaganda effect to increase any Chinese sentiment in the Empire of Japan. Believing that a conflict in Manchuria would be in the best interests of Japan, and acting in the spirit of the Japanese concept of Gekko Kujo, Kwantung, Army Colonel Sashiro Itagaki and Lieutenant Colonel Kanji Ishiwara independently devised a plan to provoke Japan into invading Manchuria. The operation was originally planned to be executed on 28 September, but the date was changed to September 18, when First Lieutenant Suimri Komodo, of the independent garrison unit of the 29th Infantry Regiment, which guarded the South Manchuria Railway, placed explosives near the tracks, but far enough away to do no real damage. At around 10:20 p.m. on September 18, the explosives were detonated. However, the explosion was minor and only a 1.5-meter section on one side of the rail was damaged. In fact, a train from Changchun passed by the site on this damaged track without difficulty and arrived at Shenyang at 10:30 p.m. On the morning of September 19, two artillery pieces installed at the Mukden Officers Club opened fire on the Chinese garrison nearby in response to the alleged Chinese attack on the railway. Zhang Shuiling's small air force was destroyed and his soldiers fled their destroyed Beidang barracks as 500 Japanese troops attacked the Chinese garrison of around 7,000. The Chinese troops were no match for the experienced Japanese troops. By the evening, the fighting was over, and the Japanese had occupied Menden at the cost of 500 Chinese lives and only 2 Japanese lives, thus starting the greater invasion of Manchuria. On September 18, 1931, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters, which had decided upon a policy of localizing the incident, communicated its decision to the Kwantung Army Command. However, Kwantung Army Commander-in-Chief General Shigeru Honjo instead ordered his forces to proceed to expand operations all along the South Manchuria Railway. Under orders from Lieutenant General Jiro Taman, Troops of the 2nd Division moved up the rail line and captured virtually every city along its 1170-kilometer length in a matter of days. Likewise, on September 19, in response to General Hunjo's request, the Joseon Army in Korea under General Senjuro Hayashi ordered the 20th Infantry Division to split its force, forming the 39th Mixed Brigade, which departed on that day for Manchuria without authorization from the Emperor. On September 19, the Japanese occupied Yinku, Liaoyang, Shenyang, Fushun, Dandong, Siping Jilin Province, and Changchun. On September 21, the Japanese captured Jilin City. On 23 September, the Japanese took Jiao'o and Dunhua. On 1 October, Zhang Haiping surrendered the Taonan area. Sometime in October, Jixing surrendered the Yanbian Korean Autonomous Prefecture area, and on 17 October, Yujishin surrendered eastern Liaoning to the Japanese. Tokyo was shocked by the news of the army acting without orders from the central government. The Japanese civilian government was thrown into disarray by this act of Gekkokujo insubordination. But as reports of one quick victory after another began to arrive, it felt powerless to oppose the army, and its decision was to immediately send 3 more infantry divisions from Japan, beginning with the 14th Mixed Brigade of the IJA 7th Division. During this era, the elected government could be held hostage by the Army and Navy, since Army and Navy members were constitutionally necessary for the formation of cabinets. Without their support, the government would collapse. After the Liaoning provincial government fled Menden, it was replaced by a People's Preservation Committee which declared the secession of Liaoning Province from the Republic of China. Other secessionist movements were organized in Japanese-occupied Kirin by General Zai Chiaye, head of the new Kirin Army, and at Harbin by General Chang Qinghui. In early October, at Taonan in northwest Liaoning Province, General Zhang Haiping declared his district independent of China in return for a shipment of a large number of military supplies by the Japanese army. On October 13, General Chang Hai Peng ordered 3 regiments of the Hingan Reclamation Army under General Xu Jinglong North to take the capital of Heilongjiang Province at Kikia. Some elements in the city offered to peacefully surrender the old walled town, and Chang advanced cautiously to accept. However, his advance guard was attacked by General Dou Lionfang's troops, and in a savage fight with an engineering company defending the north bank, was sent fleeing with heavy losses. During this fight, the Nenjion Railroad Bridge was dynamited by troops loyal to General Ma Jianshan to prevent its use. Using the repair of the Nen River Bridge as the pretext, the Japanese sent a repair party in early November under the protection of Japanese troops. Fighting erupted between the Japanese forces and troops loyal to the acting governor of Heilongjiang Province, Muslim General Ma Jianshan, who chose to disobey the Kuomintang government's ban on further resistance to the Japanese invasion. Despite his failure to hold the bridge, General Ma Jianshan became a national hero in China for his resistance at Nenjian Bridge, which was widely reported in the Chinese and international press. The publicity inspired more volunteers to enlist in the anti-Japanese volunteer armies. The repaired bridge made possible the further advance of Japanese forces and their armored trains. Additional troops from Japan, notably the 4th Mixed Brigade from the 8th Division, were sent in November. On November 15, 1931, despite having lost more than 400 men and 300 left wounded since 5 November, General Ma declined a Japanese ultimatum to surrender Kikia. On 17 November, in sub-zero weather, 3,500 Japanese troops, under the command of General Jiro Taman, mounted an attack. In late November 1931, General Honjo dispatched 10,000 soldiers in 13 armoured trains, escorted by a squadron of bombers, in an advance on Qinchao from Menden. This force had advanced to within 30 kilometers of Qinchao when it received an order to withdraw. The operation was cancelled by Japanese War Minister General Jiro Minami due to the acceptance of modified form of a League of Nations proposal for a neutral zone to be established as a buffer zone between China proper and Manchuria, pending a future Chinese-Japanese peace conference by the civilian government of Prime Minister Baron Wakatsuki in Tokyo. However, the two sides failed to reach a lasting agreement. The Wakatsuki government soon fell and was replaced by a new cabinet led by Prime Minister Inukai Tsuoshi. Further negotiations with the Kuomintang government failed. The Japanese government authorized the reinforcement of troops in Manchuria. In December, the rest of 20th Infantry Division, along with the 38th Mixed Brigade from the 19th Infantry Division, were sent into Manchuria from Korea, while the 8th Mixed Brigade from the 10th Infantry Division was sent from Japan. The total strength of the Kwantung Army was thus increased. With this stronger force, the Japanese army announced on December 21 the beginning of large-scale anti-bandit operations in Manchuria to quell a growing resistance movement by the local Chinese population in Liaoning and Kirin provinces. On December 28, a new government was formed in China after all members of the old Nanjing government resigned. This threw the military command into turmoil, and the Chinese army retreated to the south of the Great Wall into Harbin province, a humiliating move which lowered China's international image. Japanese forces occupied Jinzhou on January 3, 1932, after the Chinese defenders retreated without giving combat. With southern Manchuria secure, the Japanese turned north to complete the occupation of Manchuria. As negotiations with generals Ma Jianshan and Ting Chao to defect to the pro-Japanese side had failed, in early January, Colonel Kenji Doihara requested collaborationist General Chiayi Zai to advance his forces and take Harbin. The last major Chinese regular force in northern Manchuria was led by General Ting Chao, who organized the defense of Harbin successfully against General Zai until the arrival of the IJA 2nd Division under General Jiro Taman. Japanese forces took Harbin on February 4, 1932. By the end of February, Ma had sought terms and joined the newly formed Manchukuo government as governor of Heilongjiang province and minister of war. On February 27, 1932, Ting offered to cease hostilities, ending official Chinese resistance in Manchuria, although combat by guerrilla and irregular forces continued, as Japan spent many years in their campaign to pacify Manchukuo. The conquest of Manchuria, a land rich in natural resources, was widely seen as an economic lifeline to save Japan from the effects of the Great Depression, generating much public support. The American historian Louise Young described Japan from September 1931 to the spring of 1933 as gripped by war fever as the conquest of Manchuria proved to be an extremely popular war. The metaphor of a lifeline suggested that Manchuria was crucial to the functioning of the Japanese economy, which explains why the conquest of Manchuria was so popular and why afterwards Japanese public opinion was so hostile towards any suggestion of letting Manchuria go. At the time, censorship in Japan was nowhere near as stringent as it later became, and Young noted, had they wished, it would have been possible in 1931 and 1932 for journalists and editors to express anti-war sentiments. The liberal journal Kaizo criticized the war, with the journalist Godu Shinobu in the November 1931 edition accusing the Kwantung army of a twofold coup d'etat against both the government in Tokyo and against the government of China. Voices like Kaizo were a minority as mainstream newspapers like the Asahi soon discovered that an anti-war editorial position hurt sales, and so switched over to an aggressively militaristic editorial position as the best way to increase sales. Japan's most famous pacifist, the poet Akiko Yuzano, had caused a sensation in 1904 with her anti-war poem Brother, Do Not Give Your Life, addressed to her younger brother serving in the Imperial Army that called the war with Russia stupid and senseless. Such was the extent of war fever in Japan in 1931 that even Akiko succumbed, writing a poem in 1932 praising Bushido, urging the Kwantung army to smash the sissified dreams of compromise, and declared that to die for the emperor in battle was the purest act a Japanese man could perform. The Western media reported on the events with accounts of atrocities such as bombing civilians or firing upon shell-shocked survivors. It aroused considerable antipathy to Japan, which lasted until the end of World War II. When the Lytton Commission issued a report on the invasion, despite its statements that China had to a certain extent provoked Japan and China's sovereignty over Manchuria was not absolute, Japan took it as an unacceptable rebuke and withdrew from the already declining League of Nations, which also helped create international isolation. The Manchurian crisis had a significant negative effect on the moral strength and influence of the League of Nations. As critics had predicted, the League was powerless. If a strong nation decided to pursue an aggressive policy against other countries, allowing a country such as Japan to commit blatant aggression without serious consequences. Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini were also aware of this, and ultimately both followed Japan's example in aggression against their neighbors, in the case of Italy, against Abyssinia, and Germany, against Czechoslovakia and Poland.